Benefits today cover only a fraction of the jobless population. And again, this is an area where we need rapid government intervention. We need an injection of new funding. We need a safety net that's real, that's not full of holes.
What about General Motors and Chrysler? What does this mean for working people, especially in places like Michigan?
Well, I think any consolidation of corporations of that scale is going to result in further job elimination. Certainly those most at risk are the salaried and management people who have no protection against termination or freeze of their pension plans, who can be laid off in any fashion. The UAW is going to have some difficult negotiating ahead of it to deal with the fallout of that kind of consolidation.
What do you think of such a bailout, Stephen Greenhouse?
The financial bailout or the GM Chrysler bailout? The financial bailout, my sense is, none of us love the idea of throwing money at bankers who've been very irresponsible, but I think we have to realize that, if we did not bail out Wall Street, the stock market would melt down, and then Main Street would have started to melt down as well. I do think that the banks that have received the bailout, clearly have made known that they're not doing enough with the money to, to lend it to the people who need it. So I think the federal government really has to should start leaning on the banks a little more to, make this money available to Main Street to help Main Street recover, the same way that the British government has done to British banks.
I'd like to ask about another looming crisis that gets very little attention so far, are the employee pension funds. With this dramatic drop in the stock market, certainly especially government and municipal pension funds have taken astronomical hits in terms of what the value, how much money they have left to pay out pension benefits, what this is going to mean for government workers over the next few years.
It's going to be very painful both for government workers and for taxpayers because as Wall Street has dropped, the amount of money in pension funds has dropped, so cities and states will now tell their employees, hey, we don't have enough money to pay for your pensions, so they might propose different things to reduce pensions, which will be bad for the workers. But on the other hand, New Jersey and other states that are struggling with pension burdens might have to cough up billions, maybe even tens of billions of dollars to pay, and taxpayers are not going to like that either, especially when their pocketbooks are being hit by the downturn.
Michael Zwire.
Well, it's also, I think, the case that these are losses that are very big, but they're also, in a certain way, paper losses. These pension funds have these hundreds of billions of dollars in these funds, but they're not cashing all that money in right now to get the money so that they can pay these pensions. So there is, in a certain sense, it's a little bit premature to say that this is a long-term crisis for the pension funds, because it may be that in 2 or 3 years or 4 years, the market will recover enough of its value that we won't have such a major catastrophe as one might think, just looking at the numbers as they are today. I would like to come back just again to this question of what do we do now to really help people. We are going into a recession, it seems very clear, and there's going to be a lot more unemployment. One of the things that we did in our study is we looked at what does it take to stimulate the economy to get it back towards full employment in a way that helps ordinary working people and these economically distressed workers. And we have a stimulus package of around $220 billion that we think will do that. When we first proposed that $220 billion at the beginning of September, we started writing it up, and people said that's an impossible sum of money. Nobody can ever imagine coming up with $220 billion. 3 weeks later, they came up with $700 billion, of which they only committed $350, right? So there's still $350 billion left on the table in Washington that the Congress has already committed to economic recovery, whatever that might mean. And we're saying, well, why doesn't that mean take 220 of that remaining 350 and develop a real stimulus package that will help and send resources directly to people in the form of increased unemployment compensation, in the form of earned income tax credit extensions, in the form of support to local governments so that they don't have to cut Medicaid, or they can restore the cuts in Medicaid, in the form of checks that would go out to people so that, at the lower end of the income distribution, families making less than $50,000 a year, there's 55 million of those families. Send them each an average check of $2,000. It's $110 billion. It would go immediately into helping the economy, and it would be the complement of bailing out the financial sector so that when there's credit available again, there will be a reason to actually for somebody to borrow because there will be some demand for the products.
How has Joe the plumber skewed this debate? On the one hand, you'd think he'd be the person talking about what about the working class. In fact, in his own personal circumstances, he is a part of that, though he is identifying with management. He is not a licensed plumber.
Joe the plumber and the use of Joe the plumber has muddied the waters. I mean, McCain has portrayed him as a working class stiff, but he says he's about to make $250,000 a year. How many working class people really make $250,000 a year? And I think, Obama said, look, I wanted to help you, Joe the plumber, when you were coming up and earning just $30,000, $50,000 a year. But if you're earning $250,000 a year, you're doing pretty well. But the unfortunate thing about the whole Joe the plumber debate, Amy, is that it's really caused both candidates not to focus so much on the real members of the working class who are making $25,000, $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 a year. All those people wish they were Joe the plumber making $250,000 a year. And McCain, I think, has in ways distracted Obama from focusing more on issues like, how do we provide health insurance to the 46 million Americans without health insurance? And when McCain, condemns the whole idea of spread the wealth, I think of his hero Teddy Roosevelt, who was one of the fathers of the progressive income tax, and has said it's important, when there's prosperity that we pass the prosperity around so everyone can benefit.
Well, I'd like to ask you about another part of the working class, the other part of the working class that's gotten no attention, immigrants. The undocumented immigrants in the country. It seems that there's been almost an unwritten agreement among both candidates and the media not to ask Obama or McCain about their immigration policy since the primaries. Once the primaries were over, the debate is over in terms of the national debate. Your sense?
It's really quite interesting that that's true. I didn't expect that. I thought that the immigration question would be really a much larger one. Of course, McCain has a fairly liberal view towards immigration in the sense that he doesn't want to just expel everybody and lock them all up.
So much so that Lou Dobbs and Fox, they were calling him Juan McCain.
So is that right? Well, you have a situation there where maybe there's not that big of a difference, and these candidates have decided, and their campaigns have decided that that's just too much of a third rail, and it's too emotional and it's too crazy, and they're just not going to get into it. They don't need to get into it, and each has enough in them, in their backgrounds and in their programs, that Lou Dobbs and that whole militant anti-immigrant crowd is going to be dissatisfied with both of them, so why get into it?
But there is the issue of will they continue to build a wall? Will they continue to prosecute, have the raids, the massive raids?
But you can't get into those questions with them without opening the whole question of immigration. I think what they've done is they've decided they're just not going to talk about the whole question of immigration, and then we can only be left to guess what will they actually do. I will say that in the immigration situation, whatever happens, we want to make sure that there isn't a two-tier labor force that we have in this country, where the immigrants, in whatever form they're here as guest workers or in whatever guise we sort of allow them to come into America, that they are some second-class labor citizen. That I think we really have to be very careful about. And I will say about the Employee Free Choice Act that Steve Early was talking about before, it's a very, very important thing. On the other hand, I'm concerned that a Democratic administration in Congress is going to give the labor movement an Employee Free Choice Act.
Which means?
Which means that the principal legislative agenda item for the labor movement to make it easier to organize unions will be enacted, probably quite early. And then the labor movement is going to be told, you go organize your workers and don't bother us anymore with any other questions, because now we have serious business to attend to and all the rest of the agenda of the government. And labor is going to be cut out in issues of the war in Iraq or in Afghanistan, in issues of the reconstruction of the banking regulations, in issues of housing and all the other items that are so very important to working people in this country. The labor movement is going to get its piece in the Employee Free Choice Act. And in much the same way that the Clinton administration gave labor the Employee Family Leave Act, unpaid, but still a Family Leave Act in 1993 was a very important thing, but that was pretty much the end of labor's agenda in the Clinton years, and the rest of it was devoted to deregulating the financial industry and ending welfare as we know it. And so I'm a little concerned that we are going to be in a situation where we put so much weight on the Employee Free Choice Act that we are going to be left aside in the other deliberations.
I see things somewhat differently from Mike. I think the unions are playing their hand pretty well this election. They're going all out to help Obama, and clearly, if Obama's elected, they're going to expect him to implement some of the things they're pushing for, and they're pushing for three things at once. One is this Employee Free Choice Act, which would make it easier for workers to unionize. Second, they're pushing very, very, very hard for economic stimulus, which dovetails with what a lot of liberal Democrats want anyway. And third, they're pushing very, very hard for universal health coverage, and that's something Obama has promised. So I think they'll feel very, very angry if Obama says, we gave you Employee Free Choice Act and we're going to ignore you on other things. The other things they're pushing for are the very things that many, many Democrats are pushing for.
Last word. You have 30 seconds, Steve Early.
I think it's overly optimistic to assume that the Employee Free Choice Act, expanding the right to organize in this country, is going to sail through the new Congress. You look back at the history of labor law reform efforts over the last 30 years under Clinton and Carter, a lot of disappointment and a record of failure. It's going to take a tremendous grassroots movement now and then by organized workers to keep the pressure on Obama and the Democrats to make this long overdue change so that workers can organize more freely without management interference. It's not a done deal, and I think Obama would prefer to avoid a knockdown, drag-out fight with corporate America over this issue right out of the box.
Steve Early, I want to thank you for being with us. Steve Early, Boston-based labor journalist. Stephen Greenhouse with the New York Times. His book, The Big Squeeze. And Michael Zweig joining us from State University of New York, Stony Brook. He is the head of the Center for the Study of Working Class Life at SUNY Stony Brook. His book, What's Class?